here today to talk about a few things with Gladys, my newest patchwork pattern. It is one that I started working on last summer when I realized I just had an increasingly big pile of remnant fabrics that I wasn't using. I actually donated a ton of them and also had friends come in town and they scrounged through and grabbed ones that they wanted. Still had more than I knew what to do with. Sewing a purely scrappy quilt is really stressful to me. I think it's the mess involved in pulling everything out. It kills my creative, energy. It's like I will sew a scrappy-esque, which means maybe instead of the background fabric of a quilt, maybe instead of it being all the same white, I'll use a collection of whites or low volumes, which are just fabrics with really little bitty prints on them that they're not big prints. It's just small, subtle designs. So maybe I'll switch out and do a low volume or multiple creams, but that's about as crazy as I get with a scrappy quilt. So all these piles of scraps were really overwhelming. And when these friends came in town, they come in once a year and they do a quilt retreat together, and I kind of pop in and out and join in. And as we were hanging out and I was going through my scraps and just telling them, I just have no idea how to even work with these. One of my friends, Sarah, said, just cut them into 2.5-inch squares because at least you have something that's a usable size and you can go from there. And so I did, because they all had projects they were working on and I just wanted to be part of the party. And so I cut a ton of 2.5-inch squares. And then I recalled this other pattern that I had seen. It wasn't really even a pattern. It was just kind of a scrap quilt in a magazine. And it was not what I ended up making. Gladys is different, but it kind of got my wheels turning for what I might want to do with those 2.5-inch squares. Fast forward to, I guess, about a month and a half ago, this scrap quilt that I had decided to try out. I was ready to send it off to a quilter. I sent it off to a friend, and when it came back, I wanted to make 15 more. And that's when I decided I'm going to write this up, because if I want to make it a ton of times, then maybe other people would want to make it too. And why not have the math ready for other people to use? So that's kind of the genesis of the Gladys pattern. Today I want to show one of the trickiest steps is sewing your columns together. So you have columns of 4-patch squares like this. You'll have a long column like this, and then you'll have a column of a sashing fabric, and then you'll have another 4-patch column. Here, my Gladys, you can see this is the 4-patch column. Here's a sashing column. Here's another 4-patch. And when you are sewing a quilt top like this together, where it has pieces with seams and then a long column without them, one of the things that's easiest to do, get all of your horizontal seams off where they don't line up. I decided to just record a little tutorial to show you how to sew these columns together to make sure across your quilt you're seeing continuity with where those horizontal seam lines are showing up on the 4-patch blocks. I'll probably do another video about sewing the whole quilt because it is just one I can't stop making. I'm going to show you how to sew these columns together. I think that is pretty much the only tricky step of making Gladys. The rest of it is very straightforward and user-friendly, and you're going to make the prettiest quilt with this. I'm so excited to see it. Okay, so here you can see I have my 4-patch column and I have my sashing column, and I need to sew these together. So even though the lining up doesn't really matter here, it just helps me to pin this step so that I'm not having to readjust the whole way down. Pinning just makes me be able to sew a little bit faster. I like to put my pins though a little bit away from the edge so that when I'm sewing, I don't have to pull them out then. And then the way that you assemble this is just one big long strip, so I'm going to cut it off here and just go sew this strip together. Okay, so they're sewn together and I've pressed that seam towards the sashing to kind of reduce bulk. Now it's time to add the next 4 patch block column. So to make sure that those seams are lined up, I turn it right sides together, and then I take time to match up the block seams from one column to the next. Where those match up, I'm going to pin all the way down the length of the column. You can really pin here as much as you prefer, but I will say the more you pin, the better, and the less likely it is for your column to get uneven over the course of sewing along that length of column. So really taking time to pin throughout this column is going to pay off in the long run. One note I'll add is that I oftentimes will pin a little away from the edge just to make sure that I don't have to stop and pull out every pin, and also I'm not worried about sewing over pins that I might miss. This just helps me to be able to sit down and sew without pausing every few seconds to remove another pin. Okay, so I've sewn them together, and here you can see how nicely they line up. Just visually, it looks so much better for your eye to be able to see those seams. And this is just worth the time to make sure those columns are all lined up exactly how you want them.